Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest edition of CNF Talks, where we interview speakers at our upcoming conferences. Today, we're speaking to Mark Gough, who's the CEO at Capital Coalitions. Mark is going to be speaking at the Biodiversity and Nature Market Summit, which is being held in London on the 27th of June. Mark, welcome.
Hi.
It's good to have you with us. Let's turn to our first question. How far have we got in terms of businesses getting to grips with their impact on nature in comparison, say, to their progress on climate change?
So, first of all, I think that the connections between climate and nature are really important here. That we shouldn't actually be asking the question whether they're comparable or different, because they're all interconnected. So at least 30% of the climate solution is going to come from nature. And part of the problem that we've had in the past is that we've only focused on the money and the finance, which is why we've got these problems with climate, nature, and people. So if we just focus on climate first and then we go on to the next one, we're going to have unintended consequences. So the first point to make, I think, is these issues are all interconnected. But I think the point you're trying to get to here is that obviously climate is further ahead in the way that people are thinking about it. People have progressed a lot more in that area. But climate is a driver of biodiversity loss, and there is complexity around some of the biodiversity work, but it's not impossible to overcome that. And I think that there's a lot of organizations now, most of the people that were working on climate are now starting to look at nature, particularly with initiatives such as the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures work coming through. Some of the other pieces of the puzzle that are appearing now. So nature is becoming a core part of a lot of what companies and financial institutions are looking at.
That's good to hear. Pardon me. I hear that for many companies, that they say that assessing their impact on nature is much more complex than, leaving aside for one moment the interdependencies, much more complex than measuring their impact on the climate. Do you think that measurement is a key issue here?
Yes, it is. But complexity, I mean, we as a species have done amazing things getting over complexity, flying to the moon, etc. Complexity is something that we can handle, and we handle that every day from all of the computer devices we own and all of those sort of things. So complexity shouldn't be a barrier to this. It is a complex system because it's interconnected. And I think the thing is with climate, it's a single issue that we're able to measure one thing. With biodiversity and nature, you're measuring the interplay. It's an ecosystem, literally, of these things that are interconnected. So how do you measure that? But there are very good ways of doing it. The idea of capital, natural capital, measuring the stock of the resource that we've got, the stock of nature, the amount of trees, the amount of water that create a flow of benefits, the ecosystem services for people. That way of measuring this is actually quite logical and quite easy to follow. So it doesn't have to be as complex as people think. I think the other bit of this and the complexity issue is that there's lots of initiatives, lots of ideas out there, lots of different ways you can follow. But actually, most of them are interdependent and interconnected in these approaches. So the Align project, for example, that's just come together, takes over 20 different biodiversity metrics and brought all of those people together to work out how those metrics interconnect. So there is simplification and systems out there that make it much easier to do. The main thing really is, from a business and finance perspective, is to get going on this. There are plenty of tools from Business for Nature and various others and the starter kits for how to pick this up and actually start on it. And it isn't as complex once you get into it as it first may seem.
And I guess that's a nice segue perhaps to your natural capital protocol that you provide to assist companies incorporate natural capital impact into their strategy and decision making. Could you tell us a bit more about that? I mean, what does the protocol set out to do? How does it help companies? How should they use it? Just in brief.
Yeah. So first of all, it's not my protocol. It's the culmination of about 40 different organizations in the space that have written methodologies. So it's very much owned by the community that's working on this, which is why it's involved and included in international agreements and is the sort of bedrock for any work on natural capital. So that's the first thing. What it's trying to achieve, it's producing information. It's a 9-step process that you can follow, very logical process to follow, that you can tick off. I've done step 1, I've done step 2, that you can follow that process to actually create information which is useful for decision making. So most of the time it's used for what we would technically call an option appraisal. So that would be deciding on whether to place a factory in one country or another country, or put a widget into a product. So a lot of the technologies and things that have moved on, like most of the car manufacturers, when they've moved to work on electrification of cars, what they've done is they've used some form of valuation through the natural capital protocol to make sure they understand the bits that go into the cars, how they're going to transform their strategy, that sort of work. So built environment, lots of work there, agriculture, lots of work there, but anyone can be using this really to have a better understanding of nature, because at the moment, on the way that our decisions are made in your risk profiles and in the way that your option appraisals, your capex decisions are made, you'll get your templates, and those templates will say the cost and benefit. It won't say your relationship with nature. And because that's not on there, we don't answer it. It's kept invisible. And then we have unintended consequences where we make a decision which might be harmful for nature, which comes back and bites the company later, actually damages the local environment. So it's really important that we actually have a way of getting better information for better decision making. And what the protocol does is provide a structured way, an operating system, to bring more informed decision making into the way that you make decisions inside your organization.
Yeah, a very valuable tool. Looking at it slightly differently, and so we're talking about reporting and measurement and so on, but what do you see as the main opportunities linked to nature? And do you think that nature tech has a big role to play?
Definitely nature tech has a very big role to play here, I think. One thing when you're talking about the disclosures you just mentioned there as well, I should just make it clear that the Natural Capital Protocol is now completely embedded into the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures. So if you've applied the protocol in the past, you're already several steps ahead. So you can start to look at the disclosures much more. And we've had many companies come to us and say, I'm so pleased I did the Natural Capital Protocol over the last 5 years because I'm ready for TNFD. Or if you're coming to TNFD, you probably have to come back and think about the protocol to be able to apply it. So just to show that connection. Nature tech is a growing market, but it's still very small. I think the latest figures last year were 1.85 billion, the market size. So it's not a big market, but it's growing massively. About 130% growth between 2020 and 2022. Lots of really interesting ideas in this space. I remember, when was it, about 10 years ago, I was trying to do some soil sampling. It was costing £1,000 to do some soil sampling because we wanted to know whether the soil quality was good in the farms for the companies that I was working for. You can now do that with environmental DNA testing very, very cheaply. Organizations like Naturemetrics have really moved that on. And there are
I know them well.
markets that are doing really well. So the agricultural market is really growing around nature tech. Land Banking Group, another one. I'm going to get in trouble here. I'm mentioning a few and not everyone, aren't I? But Land Banking Group is doing some really good stuff at the moment, looking at the work that they are doing around creating a framework that uses the concept of natural capital to actually start putting that back into the tech. And how do we measure it? We've just run a digitalization project linking all of the frameworks together with the same taxonomy and digitalization. We did this with finance data much, much later, and we had to retrofit it into the financial system. As we're starting to do nature data, we need to have that digitalized and getting to people. I don't want hundreds of PDFs and reports on my desk. I want the information to get to me straight away. So a project we've been running, the digitalization of sustainability data project, is really key to that, to get that information to flow. But I think it's a new market, the nature tech. I think there's the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures has a good project on it as well. There's Nature for Climate is doing a lot of work in this space as well. But how do we connect these up? And I think the next stage for nature tech isn't coming up with a great new idea. It's looking at actually where the needs are in the system. What is it that's driving a financial institution at the moment? What is the issue they need to address? And then getting tech to fit into it. So we've had the blooming bit with tech, new techs, new ideas, great ideas, but they're not interconnected yet. They're not delivering as a whole. So if we flip that to look at the issues that we're facing and try and get the tech solutions to answer those issues, that I think is what we're going to see in this next year.
Yeah, that sounds very, very sensible. You mentioned briefly there about the other protocol frameworks. There are a number of these interlinked protocol frameworks. How do these fit together? And what type of impacts, dependencies, financial risks, and opportunities should be the subject of company disclosure, do you think?
So They are much more interconnected than they first may seem. So the digitalization project, for example, I just mentioned, is very much interconnecting the International Sustainability Standards Board, the European work that's going on, the other
Yeah,
work around the
yeah.
world. All of those need a common language. But from a point of view of the Natural Capital Protocol, and we also help to produce the Social and Human Capital Protocol, we're actually now bringing all of that together into one framework which will look at the interdependencies and interconnections of those, which we'll be announcing more about later this year, which
Okay.
is taken a really difficult effort, actually, because when you start looking at the trade-offs, say you succeed in doing something on climate, and then you start thinking about nature afterwards, you've already cut off certain avenues of what you can achieve. So you have to look at this as an interdependency, and there's always a trade-off. You do one, something else wins or loses. So
Yeah.
I really dislike the word maximize. It's about optimizing the way these interconnect is really what we're looking for there. But we're seeing, the International Labour Organization talking about climate and nature, which you wouldn't have expected. We're seeing UNEP-FI at the moment talking about the connections between gender and nature risk, the latest report they've just come out with. So, I think there's quite a lot of work that's seeing those interdependencies and interconnections. One of the things we did do with a lot of organizations, including the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, Science-Based Targets Network, and some of the others in the space, we've all agreed on a common language we're now using, ACT-D, so assess, commit, transform, and then disclose. We're all using that common framing because when we looked at our frameworks, they all had similar words in, but not quite the same. So why are we doing that? We're not doing that we're doing that for our own ego. So we dropped all of that. We're now using the same language. We've all compromised on that to make sure that if you do pick up the Natural Capital Protocol one day, you can then go on to set targets with science-based targets. You can then go on to your disclosures with the TNFD. You can do all of those bits because the language in them is consistent. And I think that's really important at this phase.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think standardization, integration, removing overlapping, making it simpler for companies to understand what it is they should be doing are key. All of which, of course, we're going to be discussing in more depth at the event, the Biodiversity and Nature Market Summit on the 27th of June in London. So very much hope all our viewers be able to join us there in person. And thank you very much, Mark, for those insights. Very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Maurice.